Hey, what's up everybody? Comrade Gunpla back here with another episode. This time we're taking a look at the high-grade Pharact. Notice that my environment is a bit different here. My girlfriend recently moved to Minnesota, so I'm spending some of my time here. I'm still in the process of building out a hobby space here, but most of my stuff is still back in Texas as I haven't fully moved over here yet. Most importantly, I don't have all of my light sources with me anymore. I only have the one lamp here as the direct light source, so some of the footages now are gonna look a bit harsh. You're gonna have to get used to that. I think it's got a decent vibe, but definitely a bit weird how different this is from my regular videos. Anyways, today we're looking at the high-grade Gundam Pharact. Elan was probably the most memorable character from Season 1 to me. I think overall the most character development definitely happened in Guel, but that wasn't really until Season 2, and overall, Guel's fights are all pretty awful. Elan Force, parallel to every enhanced human love interest from every past Gundam series, was handled pretty well, I think. Definitely less corny than all of the other Gundam references in Wish from Mercury, which we have plenty of. The happy birthday thing was very impactful. To me, it's an even better moment than maybe the catch-up scene. Man, just thinking about how promising these moments made the series look like last year is sad considering how hard it crashed. But anyways, back to the kit. The Pharact is once again a great kit, very consistent for Witch from Mercury. It's got this look that's closer to what you would make in an Armored Core game, I think, when you try to make something that resembles a Gundam. I really like these designs that break out of the usual Gundam framework, especially when they're different from all the other designs in the series. Kind of reminds me of all the cool designs in the second half of Zeta. Very, very futuristic. We have these beefy legs and fat backpack, but the torso is very skinny, very stylized. The only seam lines are on these backpack parts, and they widen this so you can pass these as panel line details if you want to. So, if you don't want to fix these, you don't even have to. There are a lot of hollow parts to fill on a lot of these connection parts, but on the other hand, we have fully sealed bottoms of the feet, which really annoys me because Bandai clearly is able to design fully sealed feet. They're just choosing not to do this on most kits. Okay, so I didn't have any modifying tools in Minnesota, so I waited till I came back to Texas to work on this kit so I can do it justice. I wanted to do something different on this kit, as I've pretty much done the exact same look on most of my kits that I built this year. I think for something that looks this futuristic, doing that realistic shaded look just isn't very fitting, so I'm going to go with a glossy look this time. Last time I did a glossy kit was over 2 years ago. It's like the 4th or 5th kit that I've ever painted, the high-grade Cubily. It's honestly a bit embarrassing to show this off. If I did this kit today, I would have done so many things differently. The pearl white was decent, but that's about it on this kit. The metallics didn't look glossy at all, so this time I'm going to do a proper glossy build with proper techniques. A lot of people like me struggle with glossy builds. You can't just use gloss paint and put a gloss clear top coat and call it a day. To understand what to do, we first need to talk about what makes paint glossy. As I've gone over my last 3D printed figure video, a surface being glossy or matte is entirely based on how smooth the surface is. A smooth surface would bounce lights uniformly, creating a glossy look, whereas a rough surface bounces lights all over, creating a matte look. So basically, there are two keys to achieving a good gloss coat. The base has to be as smooth as possible, and the paints that go on top have to be wet, so it can naturally spread out into a smooth surface as it dries. With that in mind, the most important step of this build is sanding every surface to a high grit. One, you need to ensure that the surfaces are all sanded so wet paint can stick onto these surfaces, and the surfaces are smooth so the paint that go on top will have an easier time becoming smooth. Secondly, plastics can have these shrinks after extrusion, which isn't as obvious with a matte coat, but with a glossy coat, you'll absolutely notice these. and sanding every surface makes it easier to spot these areas. This is going to be a tedious process, but trust me, this is absolutely necessary. After sanding, you're going to lose some of these straight edges, so we need to get them back. Sanding with the sanding board can get you flat edges, but a lot of these edges are also kind of curved. So I'm using a knife here to scrape along the edges so I can get a flat edge while also following the contour of the edge. Some of these parts have a continuous surface across multiple parts. When that happens, I'm usually sanding with the parts assembled together so I can make sure they're all uniformly sanded. All that sanding is going to also lighten a lot of the panel lines, so it's good to rescribe all of them. I wanted large continuous surfaces to show off the glossy finish, so I'm not adding a whole lot of details. I added a couple of panel lines here and there, and red point details on all of the existing notches. Adding red points is a great way to quickly add noticeable areas on an otherwise bland surface. I've explained my superglue antenna method a bunch of times, so I'm not gonna do it again. You can just watch any of my older videos to get the idea. I especially recommend the superglue technique for this build, as I'll be polishing the entire kit later, which means I have to use a polishing wheel on the head, so I need to make sure my antenna extensions are extra sturdy and wouldn't snap when they get polished. These hollow parts are easy enough with epoxy putty. I kind of messed up on the feet though, since I installed them all the way, and I realized there is no good way to take the bottoms out. In the end, I had to drill a hole through the top of the feet. I know, cringe, and use a stick to get the bottoms out, then fill the hole back with epoxy putty. So basically, if you want to paint the bottom of the feet separately, don't install it all the way. I did a couple of small modifications. First is extending the neck by adding some PLA plate to the bottom, then adding the ball joint back. I also cut off some of the interfering bits on the thigh joints because I feel like this kit needs to be able to bend its thighs inwards to do that classic strike freedom pose. Time for the only seam line on this kit. Looking back at it, I actually kind of don't recommend filling this seam. The surface is really weirdly curved but also flat-ish, so it's really difficult to follow the surface when sanding. The seam was purposely made very wide to pass as a panel line, so it required a lot of materials and tries to fill completely, but if you have the patience and perhaps the help of some electric tools, by all means go for it. There is one part that's supposed to be interlocking inside, which you can deal with easily by snapping the visible parts off, then gluing them back to the backpack at the end. Okay, time to paint this up. Like I mentioned before, the base the paint is going on needs to be smooth, so this time I'm using the all-clad smooth black primer. This stuff is really good for metallics. It comes out really shiny and smooth. I do feel like it's weirdly sticky though, even after drying, so you probably don't want to handle these parts with your bare hands after the primer and before the actual paint, unless you want permanent fingerprints on your kit. This is a good spot to check your sanding job, which in my case I got a few parts that needed a bit more work. It might hurt a bit to do this, but you have to get back to sanding. Alright, since I haven't really done this painting technique at all, it means spoon time. I came up with 5 different colors. This one is made with a dark iron metallic and then clear blue, which turned into this cool metallic teal. It looks pretty cool, but not for this kit. The rest of them were made with either clear colors on black, which is what I have on the left, or solid on black, which is what I have on the right. The clear colors do look way shinier, so that's the way I'm going with. Within the clears here I have just simply clear blue on the left, and a mix of clear blue, red, and white on the right, which I think adds a bit more depth to the color, so that's what I'm going with. I also tested out the same paint on just the black primer on one spoon, and having a gloss clear layer between the primer and paint on another, and applied gloss clear top coat on both to see if I see a difference in terms of glossiness, which I honestly can't tell you which is which. So I'm going to not do the gloss clear layer between the primer and the paint, so I have one less layer of possible failure to worry about. I often see beginners posting photos of them messing up on the paint on a part, asking what they're doing wrong. I think I'm pretty far from a beginner myself, but I still test on spoons before I use a new paint. So if I have any word of advice, I would say a test on spoons first. The painting technique for gloss coat is also very specific. Basically, even when you're using the same paint, depending on how you spray it, it can come out either gloss or matte. If you're spraying wet layers by both thinning the paint down and using high pressure, that wet coat is going to smooth itself over time, giving you a glossy layer. Whereas if you're using the same paint but spraying dry layers, either by not thinning the paint properly or using low pressure, you're going to spray out a very particly dry layer that's not smooth, giving you a matte look. A second aspect here is that the paint usually has a way easier time to stick to similar paint. This is why a lot of people have pooling problems when they deal with wet layers. Dry layers grab onto surfaces a lot better, whereas wet layers with high pressure can quickly be blown to the edges of the surface because it never grabbed onto the surface and now is getting blown out by your airbrush pressure. The technique we're using here is a combination of the two. I call it a dry-wet technique. Basically, I'm first holding the airbrush a bit away from the part, pressing my trigger lightly to apply a thin layer of dry coat to establish coverage. You can see immediately the part became matte. After that, I get closer and spray the paint full pressure, in my case 20 psi, to cover the entire part. The unevenness from before is filled up with this second wet layer, resulting in a smooth wet layer that doesn't pool. At this stage, the gloss coat is already starting to look good, but we're not done here. There's still going to be small crevices in the layer, so we need to buff them out with this MadWorks polishing compound and polishing wheel. Basically, this stuff comes in 3 grits, starting from the coarse grit, wipe it all over the part, then use the buff wheel at the lowest speed on my cheap rotary tool here, work the compound into the part to fill those low crevices. Comparing it to a part that wasn't polished, the difference is not too big, but it is there. After that, I worked my way to the high grit, and look at that, just absolutely perfect. And I forgot to talk about the decals. I'm using the official Bandai decals from the Wish from Mercury set. A lot of people hate the Bandai official decals because they're hard to use apparently. I honestly think as long as you soak them in water for a good amount of time, they're decent. Basically, they have a hard time separating from the backing, so you just need to soak them for longer. And they have a low amount of adhesives on the back, so you need to use a good amount of Mr. Mark Setter. If you want to polish the part, you need to apply the decals on the clear coat, and you want to actually apply another clear coat after the decals and polish on top of that final clear coat. A couple of final areas. For all the thrusters, I painted enamel red all over them and wiped them away with enamel thinner to achieve easy color separation. The model has a couple of empty holes for accessories that Bandai just never bothered to make, so I filled them with my 3D printed 3mm hole plugs, available in my Etsy shop. These gun bits don't have anything alligator clips can hold on to, so I'm basically putting them on a piece of acrylic with double-sided tape and painting them that way. Anyways, that's about everything. We're ready to put the whole kit together. I never really liked how the feet sit flat when the Pharact is standing, so I'm going to easily solve this issue by standing it up like this, just making the legs look a lot bigger. I think that's a great look. Anyways, time for the final result before any more dust settle on the model. Okay, that was my attempt at doing a clear glossy coat on the Gunpla. You can definitely change a lot of the things I'm doing. Half of the supplies you can get better and cheaper alternatives from, say, like an auto shop, but I think my basic principle is solid. Anyways, hope this was informative to you. Like, comment, and subscribe if you liked the video. Oh, and I wanted to do a little poll here. I'm planning on either doing the high-grade gun tank or the high-grade Michaelis for my next build. Let me know which one you want to see more in the comments. I'll see you guys next time.